She said words she never meant. He believed every one of them. And by the time she learned the truth, he had already booked his passage away from England, and away from her. Welcome back everyone to Charlotte's Title Whispers. Before we begin tonight's story, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Now let's begin. Cecilia Thorne had rehearsed the moment 100 times in her head, and in every version she said yes with her whole chest. It was a warm evening in late September, the kind London rarely gave without asking something back for it. The Thorne townhouse on Ashworth Row smelled of beeswax and cut roses, because her sister Isolde had insisted the drawing room be perfect for when James called the next morning. Everyone in the house knew what tomorrow was. The servants knew. Their aunt knew and had already begun asking about wedding dates over breakfast in a voice too casual to be casual at all. Cecilia sat at her dressing table that night, brushing out her hair, and caught her own eyes in the mirror. She looked, she thought, like a woman about to get everything she'd asked for. She only wished her chest didn't feel so tight about it. He loved James Whitmore. She did. It was only that loving him felt like sitting by a warm hearth, good, steady, asking nothing of her, when once, a long time ago, she had known what it was to stand too close to a fire and feel it might take her whole hand off. That fire had a name too. Julian Ashcombe. He was in Calcutta now, or somewhere past it, and she had not let herself think his name in almost a year. She did not know her sister was listening at the door. Isolde Thorne had always been the prettier one, people said it kindly and unkindly in the same breath, and she had wanted James Whitmore since the spring he first called at their house with his hat in his hands and his eyes only for Cecilia. She had smiled through 2 years of watching that. He was done smiling through it. The plan had come to her slowly, the way rot comes to fruit. You don't notice it arriving, only that one day the fruit is already soft. Isolde knew her sister talked most honestly at night in the garden, where the walls couldn't carry her voice indoors. She knew James was fond of walking the square after supper, restless the way men get before they mean to propose. She only had to put the two of them near enough to each other, and let Cecilia's private doubts do the rest of the work for her. So the next evening, an hour before James was due to call, Isolde asked Cecilia to walk with her in the back garden. Just for air, just for a moment, sisters do this, and steered the conversation like a hand on a horse's bridle, gentle enough that Cecilia never felt the pull of it. "You are quiet tonight," Isolde said. "Anyone would think you were not about to be the happiest woman in London." Cecilia laughed, but it came out thin. "I am happy." "You don't sound happy." "I am." A pause longer than she meant it to be. "It is only, James is so good, Isolde. He is kind and steady, and he will never once make my heart do anything foolish." "Is that not what a sensible woman should want?" "Should is a cold word. It is the only word I have left to use." Cecilia pulled her shawl tighter, not from cold. "I loved someone once who made my heart do foolish things every single day, and it nearly ruined me. James will never ruin me. I only wonder sometimes if that is the same thing as never truly living either." She laughed again, a little bitterly this time, not meaning a word of it as truth, only saying the shape of a fear out loud so it might stop haunting her. "Perhaps I am marrying a very safe, very dull man and calling it wisdom." She did not know the window above them was open. She did not know James Whitmore stood just past the garden wall, having arrived early, hat still in hand, close enough to hear every syllable carried up on the evening air. He did not wait to hear the rest. He did not hear her say, not a minute later, "But I do love him, Isolde, truly," her voice cracking on the word truly in a way her sister made certain to speak clearly over. James walked home that night without remembering a single street he crossed. By morning he had sent a note to his solicitor about the continental tour he'd been putting off for 2 years, and by week's end his townhouse stood shuttered, his trunks already at the docks. Cecilia waited in the drawing room the next morning in her best blue dress, the one she'd chosen for a proposal, and no one came. It was 3 days before a note arrived, cold, brief, wishing her every happiness in whatever she chose for her future, and she read it 4 times before she understood it was a goodbye. She did not understand why. Not for a long, long while. But her sister, watching from the doorway as Cecilia's hands shook around that letter, understood everything and said nothing at all. Grief, Cecilia came to learn, did not announce itself all at once. It arrived in pieces the way rain comes through an old roof. A drop here on a Tuesday, another there by Friday, until you looked up one day and realized the whole ceiling had gone soft with it. She did not weep in front of anyone. A thorn did not weep in drawing rooms. But she stopped attending the assembly balls she'd once loved, and her aunt noted, with the particular cruelty of people who mean to be kind, that Cecilia was getting a name for herself as difficult, which in the language of that world meant unmarried and likely to remain so. Isolde was married within the year, not to James of course, for he was somewhere near Vienna by then and wanted nothing to do with either sister, but to a Mr. Pelham, a banker with soft hands and a soft laugh, and a house on Grosvenor Street large enough to swallow whatever guilt she carried into it. He carried any at all. Cecilia sometimes searched her sister's face for it and found only the same untroubled prettiness that had always been there. It was Harriet Dunmore, Cecilia's oldest friend and the only person she had never learned to lie to, who first said the word aloud. "You don't grieve like a woman who was simply left," Harriet said one wet afternoon, the two of them sitting close to the fire in Harriet's small sitting room on Weymouth Street, because Harriet had married for love and lived modestly and did not care who knew it. "You grieve like a woman who doesn't understand why she was left. That is a different kind of ache altogether." "I don't understand it," Cecilia admitted, turning her teacup slowly in her hands, not drinking it. "One evening he was to call the next morning with a ring, I am certain of it, Harriet. I could see it in the way he looked at me the week before. And then nothing. A cold note. Silence. What does a woman do with that? She asks someone who might know something. I have no one to ask. Isolde says she knows nothing." Cecilia's mouth went tight around the words. "And I believe her less every time she says it." She did not act on the suspicion that year. It sat in her like a stone she carried without looking at directly, because to look at it meant to accuse her own sister of something monstrous, and Cecilia was not yet brave enough, or perhaps not yet angry enough, to do that. James, meanwhile, was learning that a broken heart travels rather badly. He had thought Italy might cure him. It did not. He stood in Florence before paintings he was told were the finest things a man could see in his lifetime, and felt nothing but the shape of Cecilia's voice in his ear, saying he was dull, safe, a fire she had never once felt for him. He had not been able to forget a single word of it. He turned it over so many times in his mind that the words had worn smooth, like a coin handled too long, and lost whatever meaning they'd first carried, becoming only a kind of ache with no edges left to feel. He wrote no letters home. His friend Edmund Faraday, who had accompanied him as far as Geneva before returning to his regiment, was the only man who dared raise the subject. "You mean to stay abroad forever, then?" Edmund said one evening, over cards neither of them was truly playing. "I mean to stay abroad until I no longer think of her every single morning before I've even opened my eyes." "That could be forever, James. Then I suppose I shall see the whole world twice over." But forever, as it turned out, was harder to sustain than either of them expected. A man cannot outrun a memory by changing which country he wakes up in, and by the second year, James found himself restless in a way travel no longer soothed. He began, without quite admitting it to himself, to read the London papers when they reached him, weeks late and creased from the journey, searching. He told himself he was not searching for any mention of a thorn. He found one eventually. A brief society note, the kind that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Miss Cecilia Thorne, still unwed, seen at the Hartleys' musical evening, remarked upon for her quietness. Still unwed. He read it perhaps a dozen times before he let himself put the paper down. It should not have mattered to him. She had made her feelings plain enough, that night in the garden, in her own voice, in words meant for her sister's ears and no one else's. And yet something in still unwed sat wrong in his chest, like a key that didn't quite fit the lock it was meant for. He told himself it changed nothing. He told himself this for 3 more months, until a letter arrived from his own solicitor regarding a property matter that could not, in truth, wait any longer, and gave him the excuse he had not known he was waiting for. James Whitmore booked his passage home in the spring, telling Edmund only that business required it, and told himself all the way across the Channel, that he felt nothing at the thought of seeing London again. He was, by his own quiet admission somewhere over open water, a very poor liar. London had not changed. James had expected it to feel strange, walking streets he'd known his whole life, but instead it felt as though he had simply stepped out of one room and back into it, the 2 years abroad closing behind him like a door that had never truly been open at all. He had been back a fortnight, settling his property matters, avoiding Ashworth Row entirely, when he encountered her by accident at the Ellingtons' spring garden party, the kind of gathering he would have skipped entirely had he known she'd be present, and the kind he could not now leave without drawing more notice than he wished to draw. She was standing near the lily pond in a dress the color of new moss, speaking with old Lady Ellington, and she had not seen him yet. James had a moment, one single moment, to look at her without her knowing it. She was thinner than he remembered. Quieter in the face, somehow the way a room goes quiet when someone has left it. Then she turned and saw him, and everything in her expression went very still. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice came out steady. He would give her that. Steadier than his own, certainly, though he tried not to let it show. I did not know you had returned to England. A fortnight ago. He bowed, the correct depth, no more no less. Property matters required it. I see. A pause stretched between them, full of everything neither of them was saying. You look well. You look. He stopped himself. He had meant to say tired, or perhaps thinner, or perhaps the truth, which was that she looked exactly like every reason he had spent 2 years failing to forget her. And none of those were things a man said to a woman who had called him dull and safe and beneath her notice. You look as London always does in spring, he said instead, which meant nothing at all, and she seemed to hear that it meant nothing, because something flickered across her face that might have been hurt. I am glad you are well, Mr. Whitmore. She said it formally, the way one says things to a stranger. I had wondered sometimes how you fared. Had you? It came out harder than he intended. 2 years of turning her words over like a stone in his pocket had worn a groove of bitterness into him he hadn't fully noticed until this moment, standing in front of her, hearing her voice again. I confess I am surprised, Lady Cecilia. I had rather thought my absence would trouble you very little. Her chin lifted. Whatever softness had been in her face a moment before closed over, quick as a shutter. I do not know what you mean by that. Don't you? He should have stopped there. He knew he should have stopped there, even as the words kept coming, low enough that only she could hear them. I heard you that evening. In your garden. Before I was meant to call on you. I heard every word you said to your sister. The color left her face entirely. I don't. She stopped. Started again. What did you hear precisely? That I was dull. Safe. A fire you had never once felt for me, unlike some other man you preferred not to name. He kept his voice level through sheer will alone, though something in his chest had gone tight and raw saying it aloud, even after 2 years, even after Florence and Vienna and every mile he'd put between himself and that garden. I did not stay to hear whether there was more. I did not think there needed to be more. Cecilia stared at him. For one terrible moment James thought she meant to deny it outright, to tell him he had misheard, and some old wounded part of him almost wanted her to, wanted anything other than what was actually crossing her face, which was not denial at all, but a slow dawning horror, as though a door long shut in her own mind had just been forced open by someone else's hand. That evening, she said very quietly. Before you were to call. Yes. Isolde asked me to walk in the garden with her. Her voice had gone strange, distant, as though she were working through an old sum she'd never thought to check the arithmetic of. She asked me things. About love. About you. I said, James, I said things I did not mean. I was afraid, do you understand? I was afraid of marrying safely and calling it wisdom, and I said the fear out loud the way one does to a sister, never thinking. She pressed a gloved hand to her mouth. Never thinking what? Never thinking anyone was listening besides her. She looked up at him, and there were tears standing in her eyes now, unshed, the way Cecilia Thorne had never once let a tear fall in a public garden in her whole disciplined life. James, I did love you. I do. I said something ugly and half-true into the dark because I was frightened, and if she brought you near enough to hear it. She stopped herself. James watched her stop herself, watched the exact moment some new and terrible understanding closed over her face like weather changing on open water. And for the first time in 2 years, the ache in his chest was not for what he had lost, but for what he was only now beginning to fear he had misunderstood completely. "Say what you were going to say," he said quietly. But Lady Ellington was approaching with 2 other guests in tow, all bright chatter and inquiring smiles, and Cecilia had time only to whisper, "Not here," before the moment closed around them both, sealed shut by other people's pleasantries, leaving James to walk away not knowing whether he had just found the truth or only the beginning of it. Cecilia did not sleep that night. She lay awake turning over 2 years of small strange things that had never quite added up until now. Isolde's insistence they walk in the garden that particular evening of all evenings. Isolde's quickness always to change the subject whenever James's name arose afterward. The odd, satisfied stillness in her sister's face the morning Cecilia had sat in her blue dress waiting for a man who never came. By morning she had made up her mind. She called at the Pelham house on Grosvenor Street before noon, before she could talk herself out of it, and found Isolde in her morning room, arranging hothouse flowers with the unhurried contentment of a woman who had never once lost a night's sleep over anything in her life. "Cecilia." Isolde looked up, pleased, then less pleased as she took in her sister's face. "You look as though you've walked the whole way." "I saw James Whitmore yesterday. At the Ellingtons." Isolde's hands did not stop arranging the flowers, but something in her shoulders went very carefully still. The stillness of a woman choosing each next movement with more care than the last. "How nice for you both." "He heard us, Isolde. That evening in the garden before he was to call on me. He heard everything I said." "Did he?" Isolde's voice was light, almost bored, but her eyes had come up now, sharp and watching. "How unfortunate. Gardens do carry sound. You asked me to walk with you that evening. You who never asked me to walk anywhere unless there was some purpose to it." Cecilia's voice was shaking now, but she did not stop. "You asked me questions about him you had never asked before. And afterward, Isolde, afterward you told me for a year you knew nothing of why he'd gone. You let me grieve a man for 2 years and told me you knew nothing." The flowers in Isolde's hands went still at last. For a long moment neither sister spoke, and the silence between them was its own kind of confession, louder than anything either of them might have said aloud. "He wanted you," Isolde said finally, and her voice had lost all its lightness, gone flat and low instead. "He looked at you the way no man ever looked at me, Cecilia, not once, not in 2 whole years of being called the pretty one at every ball we ever attended together. I was so tired of being the pretty one no one wanted." A short, humorless laugh. "You said the words yourself. I only made certain he stood close enough to hear them. You destroyed 2 years of my life. I gave you the truth of your own heart, spoken in your own voice." Isolde's chin lifted, defensive now, the old family stubbornness surfacing in her the same way it had surfaced in Cecilia at the pond the day before. "You said you loved someone else more. You said he was dull. I did not put false words in your mouth, Cecilia. I only made certain the right ears heard the true ones. They were fears, Isolde, not truths. A woman may speak a fear aloud to make it smaller and still love the man entirely. You knew that, you knew it, and you used it against me because you wanted him for yourself." Cecilia's voice cracked on the last words, 2 years of grief finally finding somewhere to go. "Did it work? Did he ever once look at you the way you wanted?" Isolde said nothing. That, more than any confession, was answer enough. "I will tell him," Cecilia said. "Everything. What you did and why." "He is leaving England again within the month," Isolde said quietly, not quite meeting her sister's eyes now. "I heard it from Mr. Pelham, who heard it from Faraday. Whatever you mean to tell him, Cecilia, you had best be quick about it, or you'll be telling it to an empty house." James, for his part, had spent a sleepless night of his own. He sat in his study on Curzon Street until the candles burned to nothing, Cecilia's unfinished sentence turning over and over in his mind. "I did love you. I do." And the tears standing unshed in her eyes, which he had seen 100 times in memory since, more clearly each time, as though his mind had finally been given permission to look at that garden evening honestly instead of through 2 years of wounded pride. He had already booked passage to Lisbon. The ship left in 3 weeks. He had told himself, packing that morning, that London held nothing left for him worth staying for, and had almost believed it, until Cecilia's face had come apart in front of him at the Ellingtons, and he had understood, with the sick clarity of a man realizing he has judged something badly, that perhaps he had built 2 years of grief on a lie he'd never once thought to question. Faraday found him there past midnight, the candles guttering low. "You look like a man who's seen a ghost," Faraday said, dropping into the chair opposite. "I think I have been one," James said quietly. "For 2 years. Haunting my own life instead of living it." "What will you do?" James looked at the unopened bottle of port on his desk, at the ship's manifest beside it with his own name written in a clerk's careful hand, at the whole tidy escape he had arranged for himself rather than face whatever waited for him in that unfinished sentence. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I mean to find out what she was going to say. Before either of us runs out of time to say anything at all." 3 weeks was not very long at all, Cecilia discovered, when weighed against 2 years of misunderstanding. She sent no note. A note could be misread, folded wrong, left unopened on a hall table by some careless footman, and she had already lost 2 years to words gone astray in the wrong direction. Whatever she meant to say to James Whitmore, she meant to say it to his face, where he could watch her say it and know at last that it was true. She went to Curzon Street on a grey Tuesday morning without her maid, without her sister's knowledge, in a plain blue coat that was not the one she'd worn the day she'd waited for a proposal that never came. James's housekeeper showed her into the study with a startled sort of courtesy, as though unmarried ladies did not often call unannounced, which of course they did not, and Cecilia did not care. James was standing at the window when she entered, and he turned, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The room smelled faintly of ink and last night's candle smoke. A ship's manifest lay open on the desk between them, and Cecilia's eyes went to it before she could stop herself. "You are still leaving," she said. "The ship sails in 11 days. He did not move from the window. "I had thought until yesterday that I would be glad to be on it. And now I find I cannot leave without knowing the end of a sentence you never finished." His voice was quieter than she remembered, stripped of the hardness he'd worn at the Ellingtons. "You said you loved me. And then you stopped." Cecilia crossed the room, her heart beating so hard she thought surely he must hear it too. "I spoke to my sister that morning. She has confessed everything, James. She wanted you for herself, and she led me to say my fears aloud, my ugliest, most frightened doubts. At the 1 hour she knew you would be near enough to hear them, and not one word more." "I know," James said. "I have thought of little else since yesterday." He came away from the window at last, closing the distance between them by degrees, the way a man crosses ice he isn't certain will hold. "I have spent 2 years believing myself dull. A fire you never felt. I built a whole country's worth of silence around those words, Cecilia, and I never once asked whether you meant them or only feared them." "I feared them," she said, and her voice broke properly now, all the discipline of 2 years finally giving way. "I feared that loving you safely meant I would never feel anything again as fiercely as I once felt for a man who very nearly ruined me. I said it aloud to make the fear smaller, the way one says a nightmare aloud to prove it isn't real by morning. I did not know I was arming my own sister against myself. I did not know I was losing you the very night I meant to marry you." James reached out slowly and took her gloved hand in his, not the practiced bow of 2 strangers meeting at a garden party, but something rawer, uncertain, his thumb moving once across her knuckles as though testing whether she was truly there and not some memory he'd conjured out of 2 years wanting. "I am not a fire, Cecilia," he said quietly. "I never will be. I am steady and I am safe, and I have made my peace with being those things, because a woman who has been burned once might have good reason to want steadiness instead. But I would ask you, before I answer that ship's manifest one way or the other, whether steadiness freely chosen might yet be enough for you. Not settled for. Chosen." The space between them had grown very small. Cecilia looked up at him, at the careful, hopeful uncertainty in a face she had grieved for 2 whole years without understanding why, and felt something in her chest finally come loose after holding its breath for far too long. I chose you the moment I met you, she whispered. I only forgot to say it plainly, and let a frightened girl's doubts speak louder than my own certainty ever did. He bent his head, slow enough that she felt every inch of the distance closing, his breath warm against her cheek before his lips finally found hers. Gentle at first, questioning as though he still half expected her to step away, and then steadier, surer, the way the tide comes in fully once it has tested the shore and found it will hold. Cecilia's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as unevenly as her own, and for the first time in 2 years, neither of them was thinking of gardens or ships, or words spoken to the wrong ears in the dark. James did sail for Lisbon 11 days later. Cecilia sailed with him, married in a quiet ceremony at St. George's the week before, with only Harriet Dunmore and Edmund Faraday standing witness, and Isolde Pelham notably was not among the guests. Some tides, once they finally turn, do not go back out again. If you enjoyed tonight's story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe to Charlotte's Tidal Whispers for more tales like this one. Until next time.